Today we're going to be looking at how to rationalize the denominator of a fraction. So basically we're going to have a fraction or expression in fraction form, and we want to simplify it. And so when we're simplifying our fractions, again, we want to make sure that there are no radicands, no square roots in the denominator. And so we're going to have to use multiplication or use some other strategies so that we can turn the denominator of our fraction into a whole number. And this process is called rationalizing the denominator. So we're going to take a look at some square root problems where there's going to be a radicand or a radical in the denominator, and we're going to look at how to simplify that. So if we're looking here, we can see that we're taking the square root of a fraction. And so we want to think back to what we've previously learned about square roots. And we know when we have a fraction that we're taking the square root of, we can actually split that. So this can become the square root of 1 over the square root of 3. Now the problem is we have a radical in our denominator. So in order to get rid of a radical, we would square it. So we would multiply the denominator by radical 3. And we know with fractions, whatever we do to the denominator, we need to do to the numerator. So we're also going to multiply our numerator by radical 3. Just like we would do if we were finding common denominators in order to change our fraction to an equivalent fraction with a different denominator. So now we notice radical 3 times radical 3, or radical 3 squared, would just be 3. The square root of 1 is 1, so this would be 1 times radical 3, which really is just radical 3. So we end up with radical 3 over 3. And we have now rationalized our denominator. So if our denominator is just a radical, pretty simple. We just multiply by what we see. It gets a little bit more complicated when we see addition or subtraction in the denominator. So notice both terms do not contain radicals. If both terms contained radicals, we could just square it. It would be easier. But we can't just multiply by radical 5, because then we would have 3 times radical 5, and we'd still have the radical. We can't just square this, because if we were to square 3 plus radical 5 times 3 plus radical 5, we would end up with a trinomial, and the middle term would still have a radical. So this is where we really want to think to some of the patterns that we've noticed and we've learned. And so we learned the sum difference pattern previously, and that's where we had something like x plus 1 times x minus 1. And when we saw this happen, it became the first term squared minus the second term squared. Remember, that was called the difference of two squares. So we're going to use this idea. I see addition, so I'm going to multiply both sides by the same expression, but with subtraction. So I have a sum, I'm going to multiply it by a difference. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply both sides by 3 minus radical 5 on the top and the bottom. Okay, so remember back to previous chapters, we would be foiling here, right? We've got our first binomial times our second binomial, and we would foil, and that's where we would end up with this difference of two squares. So we're going to end up with 3 squared minus radical 5 squared in our denominator. So our fraction becomes 9 minus radical 5 squared is 5. Now our numerator, we're distributing 1 times 3 is 3. 1 times radical 5 is radical 5. We keep the subtraction sign. And then we simplify. So we have 3 minus radical 5 over 4. So we can see that now our denominator is rationalized. We no longer have a square root in our denominator, and we reviewed our sum difference pattern and our difference of squares that we have learned previously.